In this lecture, we are going to look at controller-processor contracts. We will start with the contractual relationship. We will look at Article 28, which concerns the contract details. We will look at other contract details that should be included, and then we will look at a term you should remember, which is multi-layered subcontracting. With regards to the relationship, specifically the contractual relationship between the controller and the processor, this must be written down in a contract or other binding legal document. The controller and processor are responsible for ensuring the contract is in place before any processing takes place. There are a couple things that need to be explicitly stated in the contract. These include the nature and purpose of processing, the types of personal data that will be processed, and the categories of data subjects. Now, real quick here, when we're talking about categories of data subjects, categories is referring to the different, for example, buckets that data subjects fall into. And so let's just think of a large organization. What are different categories of people that you have? You have C-suite, you have management, you have supervisors, you have employees, you have maybe full-time and part-time employees, you have interns, and then maybe you have some custodial staff as well. So those are categories of data subjects. It's just what are the different, again, broad categories or buckets that these types of people would fall into. Again, Article 28 concerns the contract details. It must be stated that the processor processes personal data only at the controller's discretion and instructions, and this includes transfers outside of the EEA. So again, just to be clear here, the processor cannot transfer data cross-border unless it's explicitly required by the controller. Similarly, the contract ensures that authorized persons are held to confidentiality, that they're not processing data and then talking with their friends and family outside of work about it. That would be a little weird. It's also necessary that the contract states the Article 32 security measures and how those will be adhered to. Finally, regarding subcontracting, which we're going to talk about later, the contract should talk about the conditions under which a processor may enlist another processor or a subprocessor, and how the controller would go about agreeing to that sub-processing. Other details that need to be included concerning the processor. Again, the processor assists the controller with the technical and organizational measures concerning satisfying data subject rights, assist the controller in complying with security, DPIAs, and breach notification. The processor needs to delete or return all personal data to the controller following contract termination. So how will that data be disposed of? How will it be returned? This would also include how the media, such as hard drives, might be sanitized or purged. We want to ensure that all of that data is removed from the hard drives. And finally, that the processor provides, upon request, compliance with Article 28, including through audits. A few final notes here concerning what the processor must do. They must obtain controller approval before making changes to security controls. They must detail how it will help the controller meet the security DPIA and breach notification requirements. And finally, the processor must inform the controller on the frequency and flow of personal data between the controller and processor. The final term that we're going to look at here is multi-layered subcontracting. It's required that the processor get controller authorization to subcontract. So remember, this is a sub-processor. The example we looked at earlier in the course is perhaps me as a controller, I find an accountant. The accountant receives all of my data and says, hey, this actually includes some assets such as real estate that I don't have a lot of experience with. I'd like to bring in a sub-processor to help with this specific slice of your portfolio. So in that case, the person dealing with the real estate portfolio, that would be the sub-processor. When it comes to authorization, that authorization from the controller can be either general or specific. When it is general, for example, when it says in the contract that the processor only needs general authorization, the controller must be given the opportunity to object to the employment of that subprocessor. Again, the controller should provide the criteria to inform the processor's choice of hiring a subprocessor if required. Multi-layered subcontracting should also include Article 28 provisions, which is what we've been talking about so far in this lecture. And again, the original processor is fully liable to the controller for sub-processors. In this lecture, we looked at the contract situation between controllers and processors. Remember that the contractual relationship between controller and processor must be written in a contract or other binding legal document. The controller and processor are responsible for ensuring that contract is in place before processing takes place. Concerning what's required by Article 28 in the contract, you need to be familiar with the provisions we discussed earlier. And finally, remember this term, multi-layered subcontracting. A processor must get controller authorization to subcontract. They must include in the contract the Article 28 provisions which we reviewed, and the original processor is fully liable to the controller for sub-processors.